Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Dr. Paul, and today we're going to talk about an old collector's adage: buy the comic, not the grade, and provide an example to see if we can prove or disprove this aphorism. I have over 40 years experience collecting comics, and my channel is about sharing my experience and passion for comic book collecting, investing, and conservation with you. If you're a beginner, you may think a 6.0 is a 6.0, right? Maybe as you get a little more experience, you start to notice page quality and note that maybe a 6.0 with white pages is superior to a 6.0 with off-white pages, and it might command a slight premium in the marketplace. Well, there's an awful lot more to consider than just grade and paper quality, and today I'm going to provide a concrete example of just how important it is to buy the comic, not the grade, and why some folks refuse to purchase comics over the internet at all because of this. So let's get to it. So what is our example book and why should we care about it? This is Thor number 225 in CGC 9.4 with off-white to white pages. And this is Thor 225 in CGC 9.6 with white pages. It's the July 1974 issue, written by Gerry Conway and drawn by John Buscema. It is, of course, the first appearance of Firelord, one of the Heralds of Galactus. It's a great collectible with investment potential, and these copies have everything going for them. First appearance, first cover, classic Silver Age artist, and obviously super high grade. Additionally, Mikey Sutton of Geekosity has stated that Firelord will be used in a Star Fox upcoming MCU project, and TiVo independently scooped that multiple sources told him that there was an in-the-works project for the Heralds of Galactus for Disney Plus, in which Firelord would be prominently featured. So, if you don't already own a copy of this book and want one for your personal collection, you should be seeking one out now during this bear market before speculators price you out of this book. Now, this is not an especially rare book, so there is supply out there and you do have time, but this book is tough to find in 9.8. So folks like me are looking for high-grade candidates for crack, press, and resubmit to attain that elusive 9.8. There are 991 universal copies of Thor 225 in the CGC Census with a median grade of 9.0. Fewer than 4% of the census have been awarded a 9.8, which has a fair market value today in this bear market of $1,600. The 9.6 sits at the 13th percentile with a fair market value of $525, and the 9.4 comes in just inside the 30th percentile with a fair market value of $290. So, if you're on a budget, and frankly, who isn't? The grade really matters at 9.4, 9.6, and 9.8, with an approximate doubling of value from 9.4 to 9.6, and an approximate tripling of value from 9.6 to the 9.8. That brings us to these two books, and at first glance, they both present very well, as you would expect for a 9.4 and a 9.6. At arm's length, they both look essentially flawless. Upon close inspection with a discerning eye, both have flaws that we can detect even through the slab if you know how to look. Luckily, we also have grading notes for both from CGC, which isn't always the case with a 9.4 or a 9.6. In fact, usually you don't get any grading notes at all on a 9.6. Let's look at this 9.6 very closely first. CGC notes only very light spine stress lines to cover, and of course, the white pages. Upon close inspection, you can confirm the flaws CGC noted and see several other flaws. Firstly, on the front, the ink is a bit thin and blotchy in several places. It's most notable here between the title and the trade dress, here across Firelord's back. You can see what essentially looks like white dots here. It's also obvious to me here in this orange, it's very thin. If you flip it over, similarly, this ink, it's thin, it's just not intensely colored. This is a very, very pale blue. We've seen this ad a lot of time, and this blue is often quite a bit more intense than that. It's really thin right here as to almost look like you can see the white coming through the page. With regard to the spine ticks, they're pretty obvious if you know what you're looking for. As you go along this edge, you can see several of them. That's a fairly obvious one. This area here too. I count 3 spine ticks, but you also see evidence of another defect right here, which is, I think, a little more obvious if I put it in the light this way maybe. There's a bit of a spine roll right here. See that? Same defect on this side of the book. See it? Right there. If you catch the light just right, it's really pretty obvious. That's called a stacking curl. Flipping the book over and looking at it very closely, the most obvious thing to me is we have this ink transfer line that goes essentially all the way across the book, although it's quite light over here. But it's really distracting here. This is to me, visual detraction for sure. There's also a flaw that I consider pretty significant up here. This is an obvious but light crease. That's not noted at all in the grader's notes. Otherwise, the book looks pretty good. You can see the same tick marks that you see from the other side. Again, I count 3. I guess you can kind of see 4 from this really intense raking light. 1, 2, 3, 4. Overall, very nice book, but it has some flaws. CGC noted them, and it has a few flaws that CGC didn't note, which is fine. Their policy is not to note every single flaw. There's also some soiling evident to me in here, and I think especially in this area. So those are all the flaws that I can see in this 9.6. Now let's look at the 9.4. For this book, the grader's notes include light crease left top of front cover and spine stress lines to cover, and of course, the off-white to white pages. Notably, especially after viewing the relatively weak ink of the 9.6, this 9.4 has much more vivid and saturated colors. We don't see any of that thin ink that shows up as sort of little white dots showing through in his back, in this area of the deep intense blue, or in these oranges down here. Just really presents much more vividly. Now, with respect to those flaws, let's look. You can see some spine stress lines. Here's one. Maybe some in here, very minute. Frankly, to me, they're less obvious than the ones on the 9.6. And that's partially because the way this book was wrapped, we have more of a white border here than we did on the 9.6, right? We have almost no white border on that edge. And that white will hide spine ticks for us, but they're less prominent regardless. Now, with respect to that crease, in the upper left corner, I can see it. It might take a moment to show it to you. It's very difficult to see. It's frankly quite a bit less prominent. Here we can see it with this light. See this little dip right here? That's what they're talking about. Now frankly, this 9.6, we saw here and here, that stacking curl, that was more prominent than this crease. And the crease on the back of this book was more prominent than that crease. If we look at the corners, they're pretty good. I would say there's a tiny bit of softness in this corner. Turning the book over, we note there is a crease that they didn't mention here, very light and frankly very pressable. There are what we call finger bends, again very light, but right here very pressable. Couple of little ripples here. When we try to look at those spine ticks on the back, again you can see some evidence under magnification and perfect light of those spine ticks. Here's where you can see the worst of that softness in the corner. Now I don't think this would preclude it getting a 9.8, but it's worth noting. But we don't have any of that transfer, that ink transfer rub, and the inks here are nice and saturated. Just to see that ink saturation effect, let's look at the books stacked. Look at the difference between these two colors. Look at the difference between the color here and here. When we flip it over, probably best to view this way. Look at the difference in those colors. I hope that comes through on the camera, but this is much more saturated than this, and it's especially evident to me here. Regarding the page quality difference, this book lacks some of the soiling that we saw on the 9.6, but to be fair to CGC in their grading, I do detect a bit of yellowing of the paper here that we just don't see on this 9.6. This 9.6 paper quality is slightly higher. Now that we've had a really close look at both books, which book is better overall? To be perfectly frank, I'd rather have the 9.4. When you set them side by side, to me, it presents better. Even when you look with magnification and perfect light, it has similar flaws. It doesn't have that ugly ink transfer line on the back cover. I don't think either of these books has ever been cleaned and pressed, but I think the 9.4 has more potential with a clean and press, and it's even possible with a wet overlay press to get this book to white pages, if you know what you're doing. Yet, the fair market value of this 9.4 is only about half of that of the 9.6. If you consider these books at their pandemic high, the 9.6 record price paid is $950, and the 9.4 record price paid is $550. That's a difference of $400. I would much rather have the 9.4 in my collection plus $400 in hand, and it's not even close. This is why discerning collectors say buy the comic, not the grade, and why so many experienced collectors will only purchase books they can see and hold and inspect with good lighting. While both of these books are in very high grade, you need to look at them very carefully with a good light source and magnification to see these flaws. Neither was cleaned and pressed either. I think both have 9.8 potential on a good day with a clean and press, but I think the 9.4 has a slightly better chance of getting there and will take less work to do so as well. I hope you enjoyed this video on the collector's adage, buy the comic, not the grade. Which one of these comics would you rather have? Are there any important points in this discussion you think I missed or glossed over? Is it wise to purchase comics online given how many flaws cannot be seen unless you have perfect light and are seeing them in person? And lastly, what would you do if you own these two books? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, happy hunting and take care of one another.